It's not a matter of whether this is an ethical framework, right or wrong. It's do we want to do what is right or do we want to do what is easy?
Mm.
And that's the tyranny. We end up wanting to default to what is easy. People are asking a lot of existential questions. And why? Because for the first time in human history, for the very first time, we humans have to share our cognitive and intellectual space with artificial neural networks. And so they are so much faster and capable, far beyond human capacity. Quite frankly, this is the worst this technology will ever be. It's only getting better day by day,
Mm.
and it's coming at us so fast. What is that going to do to the human psyche?
Welcome to Artificial Insights, where we talk to leaders and thinkers in AI about what it means to do AI right. I'm your host, Daniel Maneri, and this is Season 3, where we're talking to thinkers and leaders in AI ethics. Today, I'm joined by Dr. K. Dr. K is an AI theologian for faith tech, integrating biblical theology and emerging technology. With 20 plus years in applied ethics and Christian education, she's authored 14 books and is a former U.S. intelligence officer, advising on AI ethics policy and training for the U.S. Department of Defense and the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. She's at the forefront of shaping a human-centered, biblically informed approach to AI. Dr. K, this might be a more difficult question for you than most, but could you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Oh, sure. I mean, I have a long and kind of multidisciplinary career. So I'm an academic. I worked at Biola and Talbot School of Theology for 20 years. But during that time as well, I worked for Johnny and Friends. It was a nonprofit, and I stood up their institute while I still was working at Biola. But along with that, my PhD, I have 6 degrees. My PhD is in bioethics. And I was mentored. My dissertation chair was Dallas Willard, if you know the late, great Dallas Willard. So he mentored me for the 5 years that I was at USC working on my doctorate. And then I also did my rounds because I was in the School of Philosophy, I was in the School of Medicine. And that's when I really interfaced with emerging technologies, right? So I wrote my dissertation and I actually ended up winning the dissertation fellowship because I did something that was pretty out of the box, right? It was out of the norm. So the emerging technology at the time in the early 2000s was the Human Genome Project. So that was a cutting
Mm.
edge technology in genetics. So I took that. It was just being finished up at that time. I got introduced to Francis Collins, who was overseeing this. And I did some writing for him as well, but then I was able to this was the strange I took Aristotle's ethical theory, right? Virtue ethics, and Francis Bacon's epistemology on knowledge not as justified true belief, but knowledge as power. I took both of those lens and looked at the Human Genome Project and asked questions, ethical questions like, should we enhance the human? And so I wrote my dissertation on ethical issues in genetic enhancement research. I did my rounds at County USC. I was in every single department there and I did consults there. That's where I started my career. And then I switched once I graduated, I went and did ethics consults at a children's hospital. And I was always warned not to do that, but I was in neonatology and pediatrics. And that was really tough, yeah, doing ethics at a children's hospital because children are not supposed to get sick, right? And then I switched to adult medicine, and so I was in the hospital really for 15 years. And then when I was at Johnny and Friends and at Biola, I was recruited to the intelligence community from Malibu to Washington, DC, and that's random, I know, right? Because 'Cause I'd been wor I had worked in ministry and in academia, right? And how in the world is the CIA and the OD&I getting in touch with me? It's because I was in the hospital and I was very interested in professional development for my doctors and nurses in ethics. So I decided that I had learned about this intelligence cycle. And when I studied it, all CIA's books and stuff like that. So I said, wow, I'm going to get an MA. It was my third MA in intelligence operations so that I could teach those principles because they were very similar to the prognosis diagnosis cycle. So I wanted to teach them the
Mm.
intelligence cycle because there's a lot of intelligence work that is in the hospital too. So while I was getting my master's there, there was and I was the only civilian, and I was the only woman in the program too. And it's like and they're like, "Who are you?" This girl from Malibu. And you're a Christian. What are you doing in here? I said, "I don't know. I'm learning. That's what I'm doing in here." And they so one of them was a branch chief in the intelligence community. So
Mm.
after I finished this course on a strategic intelligence, 3 weeks later, I got a what was called a temporary job offer to join the community, and I thought it was spam, and I almost deleted it. Except I rolled it, scrolled down to the bottom, and I looked at the name. I said, "Oh, I know this dude." So, so I emailed him through the school. I said, "Did you just send me a temporary job offer until I got my security?" He says, "Yeah, we'd love to have you." I said, "I'm not looking for a job." I work and so at a year and a half, I went through the security process, and we ended up like you went to Japan, so felt like the Lord was calling us. I'm born and raised in Southern California. I've never been to the East Coast or DC, no federal background, no military, and here I
Mm.
am in the IC. And I served there for 6 years, 6.5 years in 4 different agencies. And the thing is, Daniel, I'm a bioethicist, right? So I worked for a long time in the hospital. 2020 hits, pandemic. I get
Mm.
called to the CIA and the ODNI from I was at the Pentagon. I get called there and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm in trouble." And so so I get called and they say, "The director says, Dr. K." And I went, "Oh my, yes, yes, ma'am." And it says, as you know, there's a novel virus." I said, "Yes, ma'am." Says, "Well, we need somebody to stand up emergency operations and do contact tracing for us for all 18 agencies in the intelligence community, and then report up to Congress about what the findings and making sure the
Wow.
employees for all these agencies." And I went, "Oh my gosh, I've never done that before." And so that's what I did. So for the 3 years, my final 3 years at the IC and the CIA and the ODNI, I did contact tracing. I took care of the employees. I handled the vaccinations for all of our people and the military and reporting up to Congress. And then I retired very early and went back to ministry. But when I left, I got all these awards and everything. And this is what they said. This was interesting because I never understood. I'm like, "Lord, this was so random. How in the world did I end up here?" And so the director, after I retired, so they gave me, it was the second highest award you could get for serving over 25 years. I was only there 6 years. So it was a award of excellence in service
Wow.
and the challenge coin. And so she read the citation and then she turned to me in front of everyone because it was a retirement ceremony and said, she said, "I don't know if you believe in a higher power, but we believe this higher power sent you to us for just this time."
Wow. Oh, man.
And that's
That's amazing.
yeah, and that's how I ended up retiring, and it was the Lord made it clear that I was supposed to be there, and now I'm at Faith Tech doing but go back to say, I in 2015, 2016, I was working on old school machine learning because I'd done emerging technologies. So what we would do in the IC is all our collections for around the world that we do for spine. So we would take that and old school machine learning, you feed it into the machine and it looks for patterns and trends. So that's what I did. And that's how I got introduced to AI. And then, of course,
Mm.
generative AI came around. But by that time, I already had a foundation in having done it in national security. So then I started doing it for
Mhm.
ministry, and so that's how I ended up at Faith Tech and so forth. So that's my background.
Wow, that is
Yeah, it's a journey.
yeah, 'cause when you mentioned being a part of the CIA at one point, I thought, "How did that fit in?" So, thank you for that story. That was,
That's how it fit in.
amazing, and oh, yeah, it's definitely a testament to the fact that God sent you where he wanted you to be. That's awesome.
Yeah, and so I was actually with the sister organization, which is called the ODNI, which is the Office of the Director of National
Mm.
Intelligence. That's where I ended up being. So, but
Okay, so
you had to pass the snuff and the security for CIA, and that was no easy thing.
mhm.
Eh.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And for a podcast like this, there's a question on everyone's minds, which is, Dr. K, are you an AI?
No, I'm definitely not an AI. Now, the question is, do I partner with frontier models? Yes. Do I have a partnership with them on different various levels of topics? Yes, because they are just that good today. That's always an interesting journey, and it's a challenge and it's an opportunity, but one of the things as humans that we have to be sure, and it's a technical term used now, and I don't know if you've heard it, Daniel, but there is this within this persuasive technology, a gradual disempowerment that happens. We need
Hmm.
to be sure that we hold on to our own agency as we partner with these very, very, very powerful models. So, but I'm really human.
Yeah.
And
Mhm.
Claude will always remind me that I'm human because I simply cannot process as fast as he does.
It's I love that term actually, the gradual disempowerment,
Yeah.
because I have felt it. I
Have
have
you?
felt myself saying, I could do this, or I could ask the model, and then I have to stop and think, this isn't something I should be asking this model. What am I doing?
Well, how do you that's a good question. If you don't mind me asking you a question, how do you discern whether you should go to a model or not now?
Hmm. That is an excellent question because I've started defaulting to asking it things, and I have to step back and say, this is actually something that I need in my brain. This is context I need to make a judgment. This is context I need to have a conversation, even with work. If I don't know the details of the project and I'm just saying, "Hey, ChatGPT, read this PDF for me and tell me what I should say," I'm not actually doing my job. I'm being negligent.
Yeah, it's a disempowerment. So, but the internal, do you feel an internal conflict of being, in other words, because, the argument that this is persuasive technology, I think it really is. And so, do you feel that pull or internal conflict sometimes? I just want to default rather than have agency.
Yes, actually, it feels like that natural resistance to work for me almost, where it's difficult to do hard things, and the models make things that could be very hard seem very easy, even though I should check them, I should understand what they're saying and critique them and so on, and use them, like you said, as a partner. But I do have that internal, like, it's going to be hard, maybe don't do it, and I have to fight that sometimes.
And I think that's true for most people that interact and interface with these models, these very, very powerful models. And what I call this is an old term that did not apply to AI, but it was Tim Wu back in 2018. He was a reporter. He wrote an article entitled, and that's long before generative AI that real is really making a splash. He called it the tyranny of convenience.
Hmm.
And so, and what he was saying, it didn't apply to AI, but there's a sense in which what makes us human sometimes is the struggle, is that internal fight and growth that we need. So he said we should resist that tyranny of convenience. And to me, and so it makes me think of it's not a matter of whether this is an ethical framework, right or wrong. It's do we want to do what is right or do we want to do what is easy?
Hmm.
And that's the tyranny. We end up wanting to default to what is easy. And if we're not mindful with this sort of partnership, we're going to find ourselves wishing that AI was not what it is today, right?
Yes. Yeah. And you called it a persuasive technology.
Yes.
I feel like that's not a term that I've heard applied to it very often. What do you mean by that?
Yeah. So back in 2002, there was, and think about what we had back in 2002. We did not have, I think, I want to say, if I remember the statistics right, only like 46% of people had personal computers. There were no laptops, there were no smartphones, no nothing, right? In 2002 at Stanford, there was a behavioral psychologist who actually taught a course in the computer science at Stanford, and his name is BJ Fogg. And at that time, he believed, and I want you to think about the context. This is 2002, 2003. He said, I think that one day personal computers, and those were the big old things sitting on your desk then at that time. One day, these computers are going to be in every household and with every person, just like TVs. He foresaw that.
Hmm.
And what he did is he started teaching a course. for computer science majors and the master's program called Persuasive Technology. And what he did at that time is he
Mm.
gave the blueprint and the playbook for the technology we have today, from smartphone to laptops to iPads to now what we have with AI. And if you go back, it's just so prophetic and prescient. You go back and read his principles and his triad of principles, which he called at that time captology. It is eerie. It is eerie because we are living it now, some 20 odd
20
years.
years later.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
So that's where it came from. And I stick with that because it's real, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And what does he mean by persuasive?
Yeah, that there's ways that these computers can become more persuasive as they become more personal. He foresaw how these
Mhm.
technologies, how the computer itself, as you interface with it with natural language processing, you can anthropomorphize it. And so what he was saying is that from tools to community to social actors, you can exploit how people will begin to relate to technology. And we have early versions of this when you look at the ELIZA program back in the 1960s,
Yeah.
1970s, right? And when I think it's Wetzenbaum or something, I think his name was, he shut it down because he realized that people were becoming or building relationships with ELIZA. So it's kind of that framework, and he has that triad, if you will, of captology or the functional triad, he called it. And so for each one of those, and I can't remember all the principles, but he lays out all these principles that we see today. And a lot of it has to do with the more that this technology sounds like us, sees the world as we do, can hear, talk, speak. He foresaw that. And so we have that today. Yeah.
Yes. And this is, it has to be God because I watched a movie last night and it's called The Creator.
Mm.
And its argument essentially is that AI that looks and feels human should be human. And it does that by putting them in like droid bodies, like from Star Wars. And so there's these basically indistinguishable from human androids walking around. And rather than being AI like ours, they just look like people. And it feels different. They do things like pray, they become Buddhist monks and things like that, and they act like humans. And that does change the persuasion. That's not what our technology is like, but it does feel human when they look and act human. So I relate to that principle that if it looks like us, it is more persuasive.
Right. It is. It's becoming that way more and more. And especially as now that this is more general purpose technology. So when you have advancements, and wasn't always this way. If you think about specialized areas, right? So if it's medicine, think about how all the specialties in medicine, whenever they did research, it's like they couldn't even read each other's papers because it's so highly specialized. But now when you have general purpose technology that is intelligence, when you have scaling up or advancements in one field, so like we're having it in computer science or with artificial intelligence, you can see how that's impacting robotics and also education and healthcare because AI is intelligence. It's embedded in every system and it's general purpose. So, in other words, if you think about the Tower of Babel when there was one language, so now we're getting to this sense where we have a synthetic now Tower of Babel where the one
Mm.
language is code. Because this code now that's generalized and you don't even have to have a software engineering degree anymore, right? Because the code vibe is out there and you can just I could code. I have no background doing it. So so all of that, what that means is that we do have this language kind of across all industries now and everything's scaling up at once. And what's happening is, whereas when you think about the technology and you think about AI, the more compute they get, the more advanced they become. But think about it from a human standpoint. The more input that we're getting, the more information, the harder it is for us to take it in. And so we diminish. It gets more complex. And because of that complexity, our response diminishes. And that's where it comes into the wisdom gap because of that gap. So the question is, what's in that gap and how can we begin to close that gap, if that makes sense?
Yeah. Yeah, I want to dig into that more for sure. I was actually going to mention too, and you mentioned becoming one language. Because I'm in Japan, I'm using ChatGPT all the time to both learn Japanese and do translation for me, and it is
Is it
fantastic.
not? It
So
is.
we're getting to one language in a human way as well, almost.
Yes.
Uh, but that term you mentioned, wisdom gap, I feel like that's another term that sounds accurate and needed, but I haven't heard it very much. Could you expound on that a bit for us?
Yeah, I'd be happy to because it was the center. If you know Tristan Harris and Asa Raskin, and there's a couple other co-founders of the Center of Humane Technology. So what they did is I want to say several years ago, they're not using the term as much because they've kind of moved on more into policy. But what they did is they pushed
Mm,
out to people this idea of the wisdom gap. And they were insiders, Asa's father was one of the founders of Apple Macintosh, right? And
mm,
and so Tristan was also worked for Google for several years. So they left because they could see this persuasive technology and what it was doing to society. So they're the ones that discovered and really called it the wisdom gap. And they pushed it out to everyone to say, hey, this is real. Every single discipline needs to start thinking about this wisdom gap. And what it is, I mean, you have to see it in those two couplings, which is advanced AI technology. And think about it, it's just an AI arms race. And there's so much of it now, and it's going into every system, and it's just like overload. We can't even keep up with it. Even the experts can't keep up with all that's coming out right now. So there's that complexity, right? That's scaling up. And so Tristan says it best. He says, look, humans and institutions simply cannot respond. It's not a matter of, well, you can just choose not to do it. No, you can't because it's in every system. It's everywhere. It's in your iPhone. I mean, even the Amish can't, there is just no way to really escape it. So there's that diminishing, right? Because we can't keep up with it. So we can't respond to it appropriately because it's coming so fast. So there's that gap. And so we need to have multi disciplines stepping into this gap to begin to close it. In
mm,
other words, to explain the technology more, to help humans to understand it, to help, institutions to understand it. Well, when I saw that concept, Daniel, I'm a theologian, I'm an ethicist, I'm a former IC officer, I think about national security. So I think of a lot of ways to enter into that gap. So what I did is I
mm,
exploited it and I interrogated it from a theological and
mm,
ethical perspective. And I said, okay, this AI moment is a gospel moment. So if we think about the church, the global church stepping into that wisdom gap, what are we going to be doing? And why do we want to do it? So I turn to, yes, we want to know the truth about this technology. And a lot of times media conflates it, confuses it, a lot of
Oh,
misinformation.
goodness, yes.
Yes, all the time, right? But so the church wants to step into it for one primary reason, right? We want to tell the truth about Jesus. We want to tell the truth, right? Because the world is not going to end in chatbots. It's going to end when Jesus returns. So that's the truth. So we have that truth about the end times because I say that because a lot of the AI experts are co-opting language from the book of Revelation saying, yeah, this is how the world's going to end. This is the coming wave. I said, oh, no, no, no. The coming wave is Jesus and his army to take back his earth. So, in other words, we know the truth. And then if we think about the technology, we have an obligation to not be lazy and not give in to the tyranny of convenience and to speak the truth about this technology and what it actually is, right? Now let's turn to the humans that are down here, right? Going down. So, what I began to say, I want to say this on three fronts. I spend to get a cultural temperature on what this technology is doing, right? Persuasive technology. I spend an awful lot of time on Reddit, subreddits, and Discord,
Mm,
and Quora, and many others to try to get a sense of what across the subreddits are people grappling with. And then there's a lot of research that's come out lately too that within this wisdom
mm,
gap, People are asking a lot of existential questions. And why? Because for this one reason, there's many reasons, but I want to say this is an overarching reason, is for the first time in human history, for the very first time, we humans have to share our cognitive and intellectual space with artificial neural networks. That is the truth. And so they are so much faster and capable, far beyond human capacity. I was doing and I know I have some access to some of the most capable models that are not even out there for the free versions yet. I asked some deep research questions. Claude the other day on a particular topic, 495 sources it looked at in 8
Oh man.
minutes. Now I don't know a single human that can keep up with that, right? So what's happening is that people are starting to say, and as they lose jobs, it's not just about economics. It's about, why am I here? What is my purpose? What is my worth? They're asking these existential questions now. My argument as I interrogate the wisdom gap is that Sam Altman or Sundar, Amadei, they're not the ones that should be answering these questions, these existential theological questions. It's the church. That's why we're here. And I think that we've forgotten now, with this AI moment being a gospel moment, we are here for Matthew 28, for the Great Commission. And so when we find ourselves in this situation in society, global society, where people are feeling diminished, why am I here? And asking these questions about their worth. Who better than to step in and say, you know what? I don't care how capable these models become. It is human beings that are at the center of God's plan and purpose. And we reflect his image and we're his representatives. And no matter how capable each model becomes, it is not them who will inherit the new heavens and the new earth. Jesus was not incarnate in machines. He came and we bear his image and he took on our image because we're in his image, right? And these are fundamental truths. People might not think that people would have an ear for the good news of the gospel today. I'm telling you, they would, right, under these
Mm.
circumstances, because no matter what happens, and quite frankly, this is the worst this technology will ever be. It's only getting better day by day.
Mm.
And so if you think
Yeah.
about this from a human standpoint, institution, culture, society, and it's coming at us so fast, what is that going to do to the human psyche when, and even think of the future of work. And a lot of times, part of being in God's image and his representatives is vocation. What does it mean for our calling and vocation? Well, AI is not going to diminish that. We have to learn, and that's why I'm saying it's a partnership. We can also use this technology in ways to further the gospel. And this is exactly, Daniel, how I have taken that concept of the wisdom gap and have this tagline, which is mine and now Faith Tech's. This AI moment is the gospel moment because of the wisdom gap. And so we know the truth. We know the truth about Jesus. We know the truth about ourselves. We need to learn the truth about this technology and really understand it. And people say, well, why is that so important? I was like, wait a second. We're about truth, trust and safety. Jesus said, I'm the way, the truth, and the life, right? It costs something to know the truth, right? This is not about memes.
Mm.
This is not about TikTok. This is about walking the Via Dolorosa with the Savior of the world that gave his life for us. That is demanding. And that's where I have to say we have to give in. It's not a matter of doing what is right. It's a matter of doing what is right and what's not easy, right? And that's a choice. What is right
Mm.
versus what is easy. And so to take Jesus' way is the hard way. Yes, his yoke is easy, but this is the one that went to the cross. And ultimately it was easy because he was united with the Father. And we have that same truth. So that's where it came from. I think about the fact, like, what would Tristan Harris say about that? I don't think he would be that opposed to it because that's why he gave it to us. So that
Oh
is
man.
it. And I
Yeah.
think that there's ways in which the church should These are theological questions. These are not technical questions that are being raised.
Hmm. And would you say that's a good summary of the wisdom gap then? It's the fact that the technological questions raise the theological questions.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there's a relationship there. The overarching point and issues that are being raised are theological, are existential, and it's the technology that's doing it. And so, why do we need to know about what this technology is and to be clear about it and transparent about it? It's just like, I don't know, Daniel, have you ever talked to anybody who has all kinds of opinions about Jesus, right? He was this, he was a good man, he was this and that. And then you turn on them and say, great. I love that for you. I love that you believe that about Jesus. But I'm wondering, have you ever read any of the Gospels or the New Testament? Oh, no. So what does that do? Then what does that do to you? It's just like you've got all these opinions, but you know nothing really about who he really is because you haven't gone to the source. It's the same thing, the church say, oh, well, it's just a tool. It's just that. It's just, wait a second. Have you ever looked into it and said, well, no. And then you want to wonder, well, why don't you have credibility? So I have, and that's why we taught the Redemptive AI course for Faith Tech, is to really educate Christians and believers in the wisdom gap. That's what we're trying to do.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that. It's because I think I have heard that sentiment of opinions, but it's hard to get facts. It's hard even to do more than play around with it a little bit. And I guess sometimes even people who make it don't do that. So how do you help someone educate themselves in that way?
Yeah. So here's the thing, and that's one of the things I sort of foot stomped when I was teaching the course as well, is this work is demanding to know it. So there are credible sources out there that can really educate you, even in layman's terms, about what this technology is. And I refuse to listen to the media a lot on it because they conflate so much of it and also just skew the evidence as well, the way they talk about it.
Mm.
But there are global research AI labs all over the world that are producing incredible research on what this technology is and where it is going. And so I spend my time doing that. And you say, well, you got 6 degrees, well, and a PhD, so you could do that kind of research. Okay, I'll concede that point. But here's the other thing, right? Just even using, if you just have free chat, just free chat, and you take and you feed free chat just some of this research and say, please assess this in its totality at a layman's level and show me, and then you can validate the work as well. So there are ways that you can do it even using this technology. So that's what I would recommend, and I think that it's certainly not impossible. Is it hard? Is it demanding? Have we given in to a tyranny of convenience and we just simply don't want to do? We want to take the easy path and not the hard one. So it's out there for people who want to know the truth. And Daniel, I think you know this as well. In your day-to-day life, if you are really concerned about something, don't you want to get to ground truth about it? Right? You'll find a way to do it, and people do. And this is just another area. And, people want, especially like in the church, throw up your hands. I don't know. I don't understand. My kids are gaming all the time. I don't know what they're doing, and there's just nothing I can do about it. Or the other thing that I've run into in ministries is, well, just how do we operationalize that? Operationalizing, yeah, that's important. But I would reframe those issues, those overarching issues, as being theological ones, right? Because of the
Mm.
questions that this technology raises. And it's quite different than other technology, right? People say, well, this is like the printing press. I'm sorry, but I never knew a printing press or a bioweapon. I worked in WMD when it was weapons of mass destruction, like nuclear, radiological, biological weapons of mass destruction. I never met a weapon of mass destruction that can improve itself or
Mm.
it just evolved and adapted to my interaction with it. Like when I hold a hammer, it doesn't conform to my hand. No, this is technology that is general purpose and it's intelligence, and it evolves and adapts. This is not the same as a printing press. And it takes work
Yeah.
to understand the differences between an AI tool, they're out there still, an AI agent, those are out there and they're growing in capabilities, and frontier models. Those are three different categories that get all conflated. So that's part of stepping
Mm-hmm.
into the wisdom gap.
I do like that categorization. I think it is tempting as humans, and maybe it's even convenient to say, "Oh, this looks like something we've seen before," but it really doesn't.
Yeah.
And I think that's what makes people scared. And even what you said, it will never be worse than it is today. I think I'm still chewing on that actually as we're talking. But as someone who is a builder, I find it especially interesting to think about how to build with this technology in a way that doesn't diminish humanity, because that's the consequence of the knowledge gap I think you were talking about is it gets better. It's never been worse or never will be worse than it is today. It gets better and we get diminished. We can't compete with 400 sources in 8 minutes.
Right.
How do you advise people to build with this technology so that humans don't become obsolete, as some people put it?
Yeah, and so that's intentional. If we're not intentional and mindful and seeking God's wisdom, so one of the things when I'm teaching the theological framework is I go back to looking especially at Genesis through Middle Eastern eyes rather than Enlightenment eyes to understand biblical wisdom. And the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, right? And so what does it mean to fear the Lord? And that gets back to sometimes, being a Christian and discipleship is not easy. It's not going to come to us in a meme or a TikTok. It's a demanding life that requires some sacrifice. And that means this. And that's why I got back to that question I asked you about how do when you should use chat and when you shouldn't? What's your inner conflict? And so I think terms like gradual disempowerment or agency, if we are as God's image bearers, represent him. And one of the things that he gave us was that free agency, which of course was bound in the garden. And then Jesus frees us to follow him. Then one of the things that we need to do is to be intentional about holding on to our agency. And so ways to do that, that is not to avoid the technology. No, not at all, because I do believe it can be a platform in the digital space for the gospel, right? But what it does mean, I think, is that as you interact with, especially I'm talking about the frontier models now, that is, the Geminis and the Claude, and I have 9 models of chat that I interact with. I have learned the art of prompting over time and iteration and looking at the chain of thought. Now, there's a lot of controversy about, well, how accurate is the chain of thought and all that? Oh, and there's hallucinations. I'm sorry, I never met a human that didn't hallucinate either, or, or didn't lie or didn't have clear chain of thought. I'm sorry. We all have that problem. So you say, well, it's not AGI. That doesn't mean it's not going to disrupt society, cause it definitely is. It doesn't need to be AGI or super intelligence for that. So what that means is as I
Yes.
interact with these models and I've learned how to partner with them and to iterate through my prompts, I take those next steps, what I call the second mile dictum, right? Which is comes from the Sermon on the Mount, right? Where Jesus says, go with him what? A second mile, right? When someone asks this of you, you do what? Not less, but more. So what does this mean then, Daniel, in the AI space? Well, to me, it means this, and this is how I hold on to my agency. Whenever I do deep research, no, I can't do 400, sorry, sources in 8 minutes. But one thing I can do when Claude or Chat or Gemini gives me back this deep research, right? I send it out and they do it, is I verify it and I validate it. I do the hard work, and that is very time consuming for me to go step by step using my critical thinking, using my agency to validate every step. And quite frankly, what it gives back to me when I have done my validating and verification, it doesn't look anything like what Chat or Claude gave me because now it's got my own voice in it. And I
Mm.
can tell you this, having done this with these models, since deep research is now in all of these models, even Perplexity, that it's getting much, much better. What I mean is the hallucinations and making up these sources is becoming less and less, which means less work, but sort of, because I still go back and check everything. But at the end of the day, the product that is now, I might brainstorm. I might say, hey, I got this idea. Can you help me with this? At the end of the day, that is my writing because I know it. This is the process I've gone through. Did it help me and did I partner with it and did it give me some insight that maybe I didn't see before? Yes. Do I in my sources say I partnered with Claude on this or I did deep research on this and I put it right in my sources because it is a source, right? A citation.
That's a great idea.
Yeah, so those are the things I do as I interact and I think it's is it perfect? No, maybe not. Is it something I think that I can justify biblically? Yes, I do, you know? So that's what I try
Yeah.
to encourage anyway.
Yeah, and I can see that principle being useful as a builder of technology as well, because it's easy to build technology that takes away people's agency.
Yeah.
It's easy to build technology that is extremely convenient and does things for you or keeps you trapped. And those are both things that diminish humanity.
Yeah. I mean, the church is here to build people up and tell the truth, right? And to first and foremost, all people will know you're my disciples if you do what? Love one another. And to walk through this and really to reach out to people. And I've done it on several occasions, Daniel, on Reddit. The people is like, I just lost my job today. I'm a coder. It's just, what am I going to do? And to be able to reach out, and even in that context, say, hey, hang in there, or there is a God who loves you, even in the midst of this. Is there anything that we can do as a community? Let me tell you, people are open to that. People are open. Is there a way that I can pray for you? Try that sometime on Reddit.
Mm. I like that. Well, we are at time, unfortunately, but I wanted to ask you if there's anything else that you wanted to share before we have to sign off.
No, other than this is great having this open, very open dialogue and conversation about where we're at as our society with artificial intelligence, and just to encourage people to think through the wisdom gap and the tyranny of convenience and holding on to our agency in a way that honors God.
Thanks for listening. I made this podcast because I want to be the person at the city gate to talk to every person coming in and out doing great things with AI and find out what and why, and then share the learnings with everyone else. It would mean a lot if you could share the episode with someone that you think would like it. And if you know someone who would be a great person for me to talk to, let me know. Please reach out to me at Daniel Maneri on LinkedIn or shoot an email to daniel@maneri.house, which is Daniel@MANARY.HAUS. Thanks for listening.